parents gave me 72 hours to get out of their house after I told them I was keeping my nephew, not asked me to reconsider, not sat me down to talk through what it would mean. 72 hours, said by my father at the kitchen table in the same tone he used for business decisions. Final, unemotional, already past the point of discussion. My sister had been gone for 3 weeks, and her son was 11 months old, and the system was ready to place him in emergency foster care within the week, and I had told my parents I was going to adopt him instead, and my father looked at me across the kitchen table and told me I was, making a decision that would ruin my life, and that if I chose it, I was choosing it without this family behind me. I was 26 years old. I looked at my father, and then I thought about an 11-month-old boy in a crib down the hall who had nobody left except me, and I went upstairs and started packing. 5 years later, on a Tuesday evening when my son was asleep in the next room and I was finally, genuinely, quietly happy with the life I had built for the two of us, my mother called and said 4 words that contained everything. My parents had spent 5 years refusing to say, "We were so wrong. Stay with me because what happened?" Between that kitchen table and that phone call is a story about the specific, irreversible love that makes you walk away from everything you had in order to give everything you have, and about what happens when the people who said you were ruining your life finally have to watch you live it. If you've ever chosen someone the rest of the world told you not to choose, subscribe right now because this one is for you. I need to take you back before the kitchen table, because the 72 hours only makes sense if you understand what my family was, and what my sister was, and what it cost all of us when she left in the way she left. Her name was Danny. She was 3 years older than me, and for most of our lives she had been the person I most wanted to be close to and most often couldn't reach. Not because she was unkind, but because she was always slightly ahead of whatever was chasing her, always in motion, always about to arrive somewhere that kept moving when she got close. She struggled with addiction from her early 20s in the specific, exhausting way that families of people with addiction struggle alongside them. The hope, the relapse, the reorganization of everyone's expectations to accommodate the latest version of the situation, the grief that arrives in installments, rather than all at once because the person is still there, still reachable, still almost okay. When she got pregnant at 27, my parents handled it the way they handled most of Danny's complications, and with a combination of genuine love and the particular management style of people who have been in crisis mode long enough that management has replaced presence. They helped set her up in an apartment, they bought the baby things, they attended the birth with the careful optimism of people willing to believe that this could be the thing that changed the trajectory. For 7 months it almost was. Danny was present, loving, trying harder than I had seen her try at anything. And then she wasn't. The details of what happened are hers, and I am not going to lay them out in full, because some truths belong to the person they happen to, even when that person is no longer in the room. What I will tell you is that she left on a Sunday, and that she left her son in his crib, with 2 days of formula and a note that had my name on it, and that by the time I got to the apartment and found him, he had been alone for a period of time. I am not going to specify, because specifying it would require me to put a number on something that should never have had a number attached to it. I picked him up and he grabbed my finger, with the full-handed grip of a very small person who has been waiting for someone to arrive, and I sat on the floor of my sister's apartment and held him until he stopped crying, and I made him a promise that I have kept every day since, that he was not going to be alone again, not like that, not ever. His name is Theo, he was 11 months old, and the moment I made that promise, on the floor of that apartment, was the moment my actual life, the one that was mine rather than the one I'd been moving through until then, officially began. My parents' reaction was not simple, and I want to be fair about that even inside all the ways it was wrong, because fairness is what lets me tell this story without distorting it. They were exhausted. They had spent 5 years in the orbit of Danny's illness, and the specific emotional depletion of loving someone through addiction. For 5 years is something that changes the capacity a person has for absorbing further difficulty, regardless of how much love is underneath it. When I told them I was filing for adoption rather than allowing Theo to enter foster care, what they heard was not a daughter making a courageous decision. They heard another member of their family making a choice that was going to pull all of them back into the undertow. They had barely survived. My mother cried. My father did not. He did what he always did when his feelings exceeded his ability to manage them. He made a decision, stated it cleanly, and waited for the situation to comply. 72 hours. Get out, figure it out. I got out. And I figured it out. The way you figure things out when your options are figure it out or fail the person, depending on you, which is to say imperfectly, exhaustingly with the kind of determination that isn't glamorous because it doesn't have the luxury of being glamorous. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment that cost me more than I could comfortably afford on my salary as a social services coordinator, which was either a painful irony or a useful one depending on which day you asked me. I learned to be a mother the way most people learn anything, without a manual and by doing it wrong and correcting and doing it better and doing it wrong again in new ways and building slowly from the accumulation of all of it. Theo had developmental delays from his first months that required early intervention. He had sleep patterns that destroyed mine for the better part of a year. He had a way of needing me completely. Absolutely, without negotiation. That was the most demanding and most grounding experience of my life. If you've ever loved someone in the specific, consuming way that makes you forget to keep score of what it's costing you, comment Theo below, because that is the only kind of love that survives what I was asking mine to survive in those first years. My parents and I were not fully silent across the 5 years. There was a category of minimal contact, a call at Christmas my mother initiated, a brief exchange when my father had a health scare, the occasional text from my mother with the quality of someone reaching toward something, without being willing to reach far enough to touch it. She asked about Theo sometimes, in the peripheral way I had learned to recognize as the language of people who want information without yet being willing to accept the implications of caring about the answer. I gave brief surface answers because the full answers belonged to a relationship of real involvement that hadn't been earned yet, and I was not going to perform closeness I didn't have access to. Theo grew. That is the short version and also the most important version. He grew with the particular, stubborn aliveness of a child who had been through something before he had language for it, and had decided, somewhere underneath the developmental delays and the sleep disruptions, and the early intervention appointments, to be here fully, loudly with his entire personality deployed at all times. He started talking at 2.5 and did not stop. He started drawing at 3 and produced art with the specific intense concentration of someone for whom making things was not a hobby but a necessity. He started soccer at 4 and was objectively not talented, and was also the most enthusiastic person on the field every single Saturday, which his coach told me was its own category of gift. He was funny, specifically funny, with the kind of humor that arrived sideways and surprised you before you saw it coming. He was mine. He was entirely, completely, permanently mine, and I was his. And the life we had built in that 2-bedroom apartment was the most real thing I had ever inhabited. By year 3, I had stabilized financially. By year 4, I had been promoted twice at work, was managing a team of 8, and had started to have enough breathing room that I could look up from the immediate demands of survival and see the shape of what I had built. It was not the life my father had looked at across the kitchen table and decided would ruin me. It was not ruined. It was imperfect and demanding and occasionally lonely in the specific way that single parenthood is lonely. But it was mine, and it was good. And Theo's laugh in the next room on a Saturday morning was the most straightforwardly joyful sound I had encountered in 31 years of living. Then my mother called on a Tuesday evening, and her voice was doing something I had to identify before I could respond to it, because it was unfamiliar. It was stripped of its usual management, rough at the edges in a way that told me something had moved inside her that she hadn't been able to contain back into its usual shape before it reached the phone. She said, "Dad has been diagnosed with early Parkinson's." She said it plainly, the way she had clearly rehearsed saying it, and then her voice fractured slightly. on the next sentence in a way she, clearly had not rehearsed. And I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do what's coming without, I need. She stopped. Then we were so wrong. About you. About Theo, about all of it. And I don't deserve to call you, after 5 years of getting it wrong and ask for anything. But I'm calling anyway because I don't know what else to do. 4 words in the middle of everything else. We were so wrong. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment. And I did something I hadn't expected to do in that moment. I thought about Theo, asleep in the next room, who had been 11 months old and alone in a crib and had no one coming until I arrived and made a promise on a floor. I thought about what it had meant to have someone show up when you needed them, and to not have someone show up. And I thought about my mother, who had not shown up for 5 years, calling me because she needed someone to show up now. And I thought about the kind of person I wanted to be, and whether that person's definition of showing up had an asterisk that said, only for the people who showed up for me first. I decided it didn't, not because my parents had earned it, and not because the 5 years hadn't cost me something real, but because the decision on that apartment floor hadn't been about what Theo had earned either. It had been about who I was and what I was willing to do with that. And the answer was the same now as it had been then. I was the person who shows up. I had always been that person. My parents kicking me out had not changed it, and my mother calling 5 years later had not surprised me with it. It was just who I was. And I was done being ashamed of it in front of people who had once treated it like a character flaw. I drove to my parents' house that Saturday, with Theo in the back seat, and he was 4.5 years old and full of questions about everything, visible through the car window, and he had never met his grandparents, and he didn't know that yet, and I had not figured out how to explain it in terms a 4-year-old could use. So I had simply said we were going to meet some people who were my mom and dad, and he had accepted this with the breezy confidence of a child for whom all new information is just more material for his already busy inner world. My mother was at the door before I had Theo fully out of the car. She looked at him with an expression I am not going to attempt to describe in full, because some expressions are too complicated for language. 5 years of absence and wrong decisions and the particular grief of a grandmother who has missed 4.5 years of a child's life because of choices she made are all in one face at the same time, and the face cannot hold it neatly. She crouched down to Theo's level and said, "Hi, I'm your grandma." Theo looked at her with the direct, evaluating gaze he brought to all new people, and then he showed her the drawing he had brought in his backpack, because Theo's standard opening move with anyone he was willing to consider trusting was to share a drawing, and watching my mother receive it with both hands and look at it with her full attention was the moment. Something shifted in that doorway in a way I had not fully prepared for. My father was inside, smaller than I remembered in the specific way illness makes people smaller, and when he saw me he stood up from his chair with more effort than standing had ever required him before, and he crossed the room and did something he had done fewer times in my life than I could count on both hands. He hugged me, not the performative embrace of a public occasion, a real one, the kind that requires something from the person giving it. He said into the space above my shoulder, "I was wrong to say what I said. I was wrong to make you leave." He did not say more than that, because my father was a man whose emotional vocabulary was limited by design and by history, and those 2 sentences were the full extent of what he had available, and I received them as the full and complete thing they were. We did not resolve 5 years over one Saturday. That is not how 5 years resolves. What we did was begin carefully, imperfectly, with the particular tentativeness of people who have broken something and are handling the pieces without certainty about whether they can be reassembled and in what form. Theo helped because Theo was 4.5 and was not carrying any of our history, and walked through my parents' house with his full unguarded curiosity, asking questions about everything, showing my father his drawings, with the same unself-conscious authority he brought to everything he loved. I watched my father look at Theo's drawings with genuine attention, asking specific questions about what things were and why, and I watched Theo light up at being taken seriously. And I understood that some repairs happen through the people we love rather than between the people who need repairing. I help my parents navigate my father's diagnosis now. I am not going to tell you it is easy, or that the help comes without any weight behind it, because that would not be honest, and honesty is the only thing these stories are worth telling for. But I show up and I coordinate, and I sit in medical appointments and ask the questions that need asking. And I do it for the same reason I do everything I do, not because it was earned, but because it is who I am. And who I am is not something my parents' decisions ever managed to change, even when they tried. My mother asked me once quietly whether I had ever thought about not coming when she called. I told her yes. I told her I had thought about it for the length of a phone call, and then I had thought about Theo asleep in the next room, and about promises made on floors, and about the kind of person I wanted him to grow up watching me be. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He's lucky." I said, "So am I." And I meant both directions of that. Theo is lucky to have me, and I am lucky to have Theo, and the whole architecture of our life together, including this difficult, imperfect, slowly repairing version of my family of origin, is the direct result of a decision made in an apartment on a Sunday afternoon that my father told me would ruin my life. He was wrong. It was the best thing I ever did. If this story hit something real in you, if you've ever chosen someone the rest of the world told you not to choose, or shown up for people who hadn't shown up for you, or been the one who kept the promise when keeping it cost everything, tell me in the comments which moment landed hardest, the 72 hours, the phone call, or the doorway on Saturday. I read every single one. Subscribe now for more raw, real unforgettable stories about the people who choose love even when the math doesn't make it easy. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next story. And stay close, and because what I'm bringing you next is even more powerful than this, and you do not want to miss a single word.